3 hours after my husband locked me out into a freezing night, the phone in his kitchen rang. It wasn't me. It was a detective, telling him his wife was lying in a hospital bed with a gash on her head, and that a gray SUV had been seen speeding away from where she fell. Elijah would walk into that hospital room expecting to find a liar. Instead, he'd find a truth he never let himself see coming. But before any of that, there was a locked door, a porch light going dark, and a man I'd loved for 18 years, choosing his son's word over mine. I was 50 years old, standing on my own front porch in a thin wool sweater, watching my husband turn the deadbolt from the inside. Snow came in sideways under the porch light, stinging my cheeks, while his son Caleb stood behind him with the calm, satisfied posture of a man who'd just won a war I didn't know I was fighting. "Go, Ava," Elijah said through the storm door, not even opening it all the way. "I don't want to see you until the money's back." "You actually believe I stole from you?" "I believe my son." 5 words. 18 years, and it came down to 5 words. My phone, my wallet, my coat, all still inside, locked in our bedroom. Caleb had gathered my things earlier that evening and told his father I was getting ready to run, that a woman with nothing to hide wouldn't need her passport within reach. Elijah believed him, gave me 10 minutes to leave, and wouldn't even let me back in for my phone, certain I'd use the time to erase evidence of something I hadn't done. I told him, as calmly as my chattering teeth allowed, that the bank was already investigating irregularities on our account, that I was the one who'd reported them. Caleb cut me off before I finished. "Don't let her stall, Dad. She's been doing this for weeks." I looked at my husband's face in that porch light and understood he'd already reached his verdict. He hadn't asked me a single fair question. He'd simply handed down a sentence and expected me to serve it. I stepped back before he could call the police on me. The door locked with a sound I felt in my chest more than heard. Standing there in the cold, I thought about the winter I helped Elijah dig out of debt after his first divorce, back when Caleb was 14 and barely spoke to either of us. I thought about the emergency room at 16, holding Caleb's hand while he cried over a broken leg. The semester of tuition I quietly covered. My mother's jewelry, sold without telling Elijah so the dealership wouldn't collapse in the recession. None of it mattered now. A folder of doctored paperwork had erased 18 years in one evening. I started walking toward the gas station a mile down the road, the only place still lit at that hour. The wind cut through my sweater like it wasn't there. My flats filled with snow. Somewhere past the 4th house, I heard an engine accelerate behind me. Headlights too bright, too fast for a quiet street. I turned, some old instinct from my fraud investigation days telling me to get a look at the vehicle, and that's when my foot caught black ice. I went down hard, my temple striking the curb. The last thing I saw before the world went dark at the edges was a gray SUV idling nearby, tail lights glowing red against the falling snow. The dent in the rear panel was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. It looked exactly like Caleb's car. To understand how I ended up alone on that road, you have to go back 6 weeks, to the day Caleb showed up with 2 suitcases, and a story about layoffs and a girlfriend who'd left him. He just needed a few months to get back on his feet. I said yes, because I loved my husband and remembered what it felt like to watch someone struggle without anyone catching them. I didn't know yet that I was the one who'd be caught. Within 2 weeks, I noticed things. Caleb taking calls in the backyard, voice dropping when I came near a window, asking, in that offhand testing the waterway, what the house might be worth if we ever sold it. Thumbing through Elijah's office folders that had nothing to do with him, suggesting his father add his name to the deed, just in case. Telling Elijah, when he thought I wasn't listening, that I'd grown controlling, that I liked keeping my husband dependent on me. I spent 11 years investigating insurance fraud before becoming a risk consultant, and old instincts don't fade. I noticed a login from an unfamiliar device, a request to transfer $85,000 to a shell company I'd never heard of. Elijah's signature practiced over and over in the printer tray like homework. An audio editing app with no business being on Caleb's laptop. Payments flowing to a sports betting site from the dealership's account. I didn't confront him. Confrontation only teaches a liar to hide better. I reported the irregularities to the bank's fraud division myself. I photographed the device history. I called Detective Naomi Price, an old colleague, and asked what I should document. I brought everything to my attorney, Linda Chen, and asked her to keep it quiet, so Caleb wouldn't get the chance to destroy what I'd found. What I hadn't accounted for was how fast he'd notice me watching. Rather than run, Caleb got ahead of it. He built his own story, and he built it well. A fake email in my name, inquiring about a quick sale of the house. A draft contract with my name typed at the bottom. A cropped screenshot making a frozen, unverified transfer request look like a completed theft. He took his father's watch, which I'd actually sent out for repair 3 weeks earlier, receipt in my desk drawer, and left the empty case for Elijah to find. Worst of it was the recording. I'd told Linda on the phone. If Elijah becomes unable to make decisions for himself because of a stroke, we need a clear medical power of attorney in place. Caleb edited it down to 11 words. Elijah will no longer have the right to decide. We need power of attorney. Stripped of context, it sounded like a woman plotting to seize control of her husband's life. He fed it to Elijah in pieces, always when his father was tired or vulnerable. He knew exactly which wound to press. Elijah's first wife had drained a joint account and vanished years before I ever came into the picture, and he'd never fully healed from missing those signs. You didn't see it coming last time, Caleb told him. I just don't want it to happen again. The night it came to a head, Caleb laid the folder on our kitchen table like a prosecutor's closing argument. Elijah wouldn't let me see the full contents, only what Caleb wanted him to see. When I said the house couldn't be sold without my signature, Caleb turned it into a weapon. Hear that, Dad? She just said the house is hers. That was the moment Elijah learned, for the first time in our marriage, his name had never been on the deed. Not anger crossed his face, humiliation. He wasn't hearing me anymore. He was hearing 18 years rearranged into a story where he was the fool. What stays with me most isn't Elijah's face. It's Caleb's. In the half-second before his father turned to him for confirmation. Not anger, fear. I only understood it fully once I was lying in the snow. Caleb hadn't just wanted me out of the house. He needed me away from my phone and computer before whatever came next could unfold without interference. The woman who found me was Mary Ann Foster, a retired nurse, driving home from her sister's. She almost mistook me for a fallen branch. She called 911 before she even got out of the car, wrapped me in an emergency blanket she'd carried for 30 years out of habit, and noticed a gray SUV pulling away without stopping. She wrote part of the plate number on her palm because she didn't trust herself to remember it otherwise. At St. Catherine Medical Center, I was diagnosed with hypothermia, a concussion, a laceration needing stitches, and an irregular heartbeat from the cold and stress. When I surfaced, my first thought was the time. My second was to call Detective Naomi Price. Naomi arrived within the hour, recognized me immediately from an old case we'd worked together, and asked me to tell her everything in order. She didn't leap to conclusions, told me plainly the SUV could be coincidence. But the fact that it hadn't stopped for a woman unconscious in the snow needed looking at regardless. Then the evidence started arriving fast. Mary Ann's partial plate number, gas station footage showing a gray SUV matching Caleb's, minutes after I'd left the house. Plate readers confirming it had circled the neighborhood. The bank reporting an attempted login to cancel the fraud investigation, traced to a device registered to Caleb. Naomi called Elijah herself. Your wife is at St. Catherine Medical Center. Caleb tried to stop him from leaving, insisting I was staging the whole thing, that police might be baiting him into incriminating himself. But something in Caleb's tone that night finally struck Elijah as wrong. How do you even know your stepmother was in an accident? He asked. Caleb claimed he'd overheard it on the call, but Naomi had never used the word accident. When Elijah walked into my hospital room, he found 2 officers, a bank fraud representative, and Linda Chen, already seated with a folder in her lap, his father's watch sealed in an evidence bag on the table. He looked at my bandaged temple, my pale skin, and something in his face cracked open. Then Naomi placed a still frame from the gas station camera in front of him. Caleb, behind the wheel, time-stamped minutes after I'd fallen. Elijah went the color of the snow outside. No, this can't be happening. Naomi laid out plate reader data beside the photo, a ledger with no room for argument. Linda explained the watch, the shop's security footage, time-stamped, my signature on the intake form, and the watch itself later found hidden under Caleb's driver's seat. The bank rep explained the transfer had originated from Elijah's rarely used tablet, its verification code rerouted to a prepaid phone linked to Caleb, the receiving account an LLC registered under a friend's name. I asked Elijah the only question that mattered. You turned off the porch light while I was still standing on it. Where exactly did you think I was supposed to go? He had no answer. Naomi's phone rang again. The search team had gone through Caleb's room. A copy of our deed, my name circled like a problem to solve. Sheets of forged signatures. A drafted contract transferring the house into his name. And beneath it all, a newly issued $750,000 life insurance policy on Elijah's life. Sole beneficiary, Caleb. The signature was forged, just like everything else. The plan, once laid bare, had 4 stages. Convince Elijah I was betraying him. Get me out of the house and off my phone. Push Elijah into signing over financial power of attorney to protect himself. Then use that authority to borrow heavily against the house and the dealership. What Caleb hadn't accounted for was that the house was never Elijah's to mortgage. I'd bought it in 2002, years before we met, and my name alone was on the deed. He'd built his entire scheme on ground that was never his. Naomi played the full, unedited recording, my actual words, not the 11 he'd carved out. Hearing it back in my own voice didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. The financial picture that emerged was staggering. Over $140,000 owed to private lenders, dealership paperwork used as collateral without Elijah's knowledge, one lender giving him a week to produce $60,000. There was resentment tangled in the desperation, too. 3 months earlier, I'd refused to hand him cash for a gambling debt. I'll pay for you to get help. I won't pay for you to keep betting. He'd told his father afterward that I hated him and wanted him gone. It wasn't true. It was just useful. I walked Elijah back through years of warning signs he'd explained away. The credit card, the lied about degree, the DUI he'd quietly paid to settle. You didn't protect Caleb, I told him. You taught him that every consequence could be paid off by his father. That landed harder than any of the forged paperwork. That night, I made my decisions plainly. Elijah wouldn't return home while the investigation was active. Caleb was barred from the property. I'd begin revoking my guarantee on the dealership's debts. And the marriage? That decision wouldn't be made under fluorescent lights with stitches still fresh. You ended my sense of safety the moment you locked that door, I told him. Everything after that is mine to decide in my own time. Naomi returned, tighter than I'd seen her all night. Doorbell footage showed Caleb back at the house, pouring gasoline on a box of documents in the garage. Officers reached him before the fire could spread past the bin. What they found closed the last gaps. Gasoline, torn bank statements, a smashed laptop, a prepaid phone, the forged contract, threatening texts from a lender whose deadline had already passed. Caleb was arrested that night. Identity fraud, forgery, unauthorized account access, evidence tampering, destruction of property by fire. Naomi was honest that the footage showed him slowing near where I fell and driving on. Enough for a leaving the scene charge, not enough to prove intent to harm. I appreciated that she didn't stretch the truth into something cleaner just to satisfy me. At Caleb's hearing, he told his father, "I did all of this to protect you from her." Elijah's answer came out flat, by letting her freeze to death in the snow. Caleb denied meaning any harm, insisted he'd only followed me to be sure I left the neighborhood, but he had no answer for the timestamp of his car slowing, then driving on. He turned on me next. That house was supposed to belong to this family. I told him, I was your family for 18 years. You only remembered that word when you wanted something from it. Outside the courtroom, Caleb begged his father one last time to cover his bail, the final test of everything I'd said. For the first time in 18 years, Elijah said no. You need to face what you did. Caleb turned the blame outward, accusing me of taking his father from him. Elijah's response surprised me more than anything else that day. No, you're the one who showed me the man I'd let myself become. Linda spent the following weeks untangling the wreckage. Caleb had no legal claim to the house, confirmed permanently. He was stripped from every account and trust connected to Elijah. I bore no responsibility for his debts, and the dealership was mostly shielded before real damage was done. My own assets remained untouched. Elijah asked to come home, to try to rebuild what 18 years hadn't been enough to protect. I didn't answer right away. Days later, I handed him an envelope, a legal separation agreement, and behind it, information for a 6-month apartment lease. First month paid, so he wouldn't be without a roof in the middle of winter, regardless of what he'd done to me. After everything I did, you're still helping me, he said. I don't want you dying out in the cold, I told him. That's the difference between us. I wasn't performing virtue. I've never believed mercy and weakness were the same thing. Is there any chance for us? He asked. Not for the marriage we used to have, I said. I didn't offer more than that. 6 months passed. Caleb took a plea deal, a fixed prison term, financial probation, restitution, mandatory gambling treatment inside the facility. The accident on the road never became a criminal charge in itself, but his choice to leave me unconscious in the snow, rather than stop, was permanently noted in his sentencing record. Elijah sold his stake in the dealership to cover the legitimate debts and started attending a support group for parents of adult children struggling with addiction, something I hadn't expected, but was quietly glad to hear. Our divorce was finalized that summer. I sold the house. I couldn't picture living where my husband had locked me outside in a blizzard, no matter how many good years came before it. With part of the proceeds, I bought a smaller house near Lake Erie, close enough to hear the water some mornings. With the rest, I started a legal aid fund for women over 45 facing financial abuse in their marriages. Women who discover, the way I did, that the people meant to protect them can become the ones they need protection from. I named it after my mother, who taught me long before any of this that dignity isn't loud. It just needs to be true. Elijah came by near the end of that summer to return an old set of keys that no longer opened anything of mine. He didn't push past the invisible line the way he once might have. I thought locking you out that night was protecting our family, he said. Family doesn't need to be protected from the truth, I told him. He apologized for believing Caleb, for never asking me a single question, for choosing comfort over my safety, for using a snowstorm as punishment. I accepted the apology, but accepting an apology isn't the same as inviting someone back into your life. Forgiveness doesn't come with a key, I told him. He nodded like he understood, and he left. That evening, snow began to fall again, light and unhurried, settling over my new walkway the way it had settled over the old one 6 months before. But this time was different, and I noticed every part of it. I had a warm coat on. My phone was in my pocket, fully charged, mine to use however I chose. My keys were in my hand, not locked away in someone else's decision. I was the one who'd decide, tonight and every night after, whether that door stayed open or closed. 6 months ago, a door closed behind me on the coldest night of winter. I thought the sound of that lock turning was the sound of my life falling apart. I was wrong. It was the sound of a prison opening. I don't need a man who only believes me once the evidence has been laid out in front of him. I need someone who believed in who I was long before any evidence became necessary. Outside, the snow kept falling over the new path to my door. I rested my hand against the frame, listened to my friends laughing behind me, and locked it. Not to keep anyone out, but to protect the peace that finally lived inside. This time, the key stayed in my hand,